Chapter 6. The ocean greenhouse was dark and empty when he parked the Crown Victoria in the driveway. Moonlight filled the sky and hid the stars. Hector walked by the line of cypresses outside the workroom on the east side of the house. He sat on a stool in the darkness of the outdoor library where the silhouetted busts and potted plants cooled in the hilltop dusk. The library's shelved books and papers mixed with the smells of the old house and the hill. It was still and calm as he looked out to the green space beyond the gazebo. The event tables, chairs, and lights were all gone. He engaged his phone's flashlight after the bookshelves popped and creaked with the cooling temperatures. But there was nothing, just some books and papers, weathered and dusty. His phone lit up with another text from Noah. As he read the text, the ground below him began to move into a swaying motion before dropping into an easy bounce. He knew what this was, an earthquake. The house groaned with involuntary movement as he trotted down the library steps to the open grass with shortening breath. Hector knelt toward the ground and prepared himself for the possibility that at any second the gentle swaying earth could jump into more violent magnitudes. But within 2 minutes' time, the quake was over. The house once again sat quiet and stationary as the neighborhood dogs barked over the sirens from the city. Books had fallen and scattered across the library floor, and Hector arranged them into an unsatisfying pile on top of one of the research tables. He walked down the short stairs and across the lawn before coming to a stop outside the old house's back door. "No aftershocks, damn it," he said, pointing to the house as if to make an agreement. As he checked the floors and rooms for damage, he was relieved to find everything as it had been before the rolling quake shook the city. The unsettling feeling began to subside, but it wouldn't fully cease until the following afternoon, as long as there were no aftershocks. But there usually were aftershocks in the early morning hours, so it was all in the hands of the San Andreas fault until then. After sipping at a glass of water from the kitchen faucet, he spit it out. He'd forgotten again. The water in Los Angeles tasted like chlorine mixed with gasoline. Beyond the kitchen, he sensed the rest of the house. The dark of the night seemed to fill it with an atmosphere from the past. But Hector could tell that the house, while old and intimidating, was friendly. "Hello," he called out. With it being his second night there, it made sense to speak aloud. Speaking aloud was necessary to get acquainted with any space that was to become a home. The furniture, the old workroom, it all seemed to watch Hector from the darkness as he walked up the stairs to his workspace. His mind drifted for a moment as he stood, and he began to survey his surroundings once more. Despite the earthquake, this second night would be a quiet one, and a more accurate representation of the coming summer. As another thought about the house was beginning to take shape, he felt his phone buzz against his leg with a text from Wonder Scott. "You're in Angelino, so the quake wasn't your first rodeo, but let me know if you and the house are okay." After responding to the white-lit screen and placing it back in his pocket, he attempted to step back into that open state of mind he'd been existing in before the Pasadena ground began to shake. But he wasn't able to access those thoughts again. Thoughts around the earthquake and the evening's plans had already overtaken most of the real estate in his imagination. In his younger years, Hector had the constant impulse to stay outside. He walked downstairs and out the back door with a glass of wine. Out behind the house, on the empty green of the hilltop, the crickets filled the night and the tree branches and bushes wrestled with evening action. It felt good to play the piano, and he felt an emerging excitement for spending more of his time in the circle of trees. He could do work there, he could rest, and possibly even learn some songs start to finish. The girl from the party crossed his mind, both of them, and then just the one with the voice and the laugh. And then he thought of the Beethoven statue, and his mom teaching him the opening notes to Für Elise. Back then, Hector's family went on similar road trips. It was a combination of long drives, cheap roadside motels, and a mix of walks and hikes along the way. He remembered driving past the empty storefronts of a New Mexico mountain town in the summer rain. The memory was vivid because this was the first town they'd driven into after a blue sky hike morphed into the unexpected, when lightning drove his family to hide under the safety of large red rocks. There were endless memories like this from road trips with his parents, and he remembered all of them with reverence. He and his cousins grew older, and his parents went on exploring the Southwest when they could. Then one afternoon in southern Utah, his mom and dad parked alongside the road and hiked out through mountain meadows of high grass and aspens. When the sun began to set, they made their way back to the car. As they were driving down the winding mountain lanes, a deer leapt out from the tree line, causing Hector's father to swerve. The car fell from a high enough distance to kill both of them almost immediately. A buzz against his leg from Wonder Scott pulled him back into the present. He didn't look at the details of Wonder's message, though. He was moving out of the feelings for his family and towards the thoughts of the ocean greenhouse. The strain of settling into a new house had been humming inside him all day. Now that the permanence of the residency was setting in, he could allow himself to accept the emerging levels of joy that came with his situation on the Pasadena hilltop. Getting sidetracked ahead of evening plans was a usual occurrence for Hector. He opened his email and then lost track of time. A few quick message responses transitioned into the activity of aimlessly looking for satisfying content on the internet. He didn't know what satisfaction he was looking for, or what information would give him the feeling of fulfillment. So he scrolled on, looking for more content that might put him at ease, or at least distract him. Chromefoot sped along the backside of Elysian Park. Hector took bites of a greasy quesadilla from an improvised drive-through stop. He hadn't tried this taqueria before, but since his return he noticed that it was usually crowded. It caught his eye a few times since it was an independent taqueria operating out of a vacated A-frame fast food building from the 1970s. It was common knowledge that some of the best food around Los Angeles could be found inside vacated fast food architecture. The night traffic flew around him. It was the 110 freeway and then the 5, both weaving and curving along the LA River. Outdated street lamps caused the lanes to glow with a burnt orange filter. Chromefoot moved swiftly amongst the traffic. By now Hector had acclimated to the speeds and etiquette of the city. So much so that he could now enjoy dispensing green sauce from a plastic container between bites of a cheese quesadilla, while moving at high speeds with everyone else. After having a few bites, though, he wished to finish the remaining tortilla and cheese in the piece of his parked car. The creative workspace was in a small warehouse in Cypress Park. Hector looked over the silhouetted heads, sipping their drinks and chatting between cars and empty parking spaces. Industrial light and attendees spilled out from the roll-up door of the event. Music played from inside the space and out to Hector at the back of the parking lot. Before entering into the world that was happening around the art show, he sat on a curb to finish his food, drink a beer, and smoke a joint. The beer was warm since he'd forgotten to bring it into the house after a pit stop on the drive back from downtown earlier. There was a silhouette walking toward him and he knew the stride. The stature, the glasses, and the tall dreads. It was Noah. He approached at an unhurried pace with his signature tailored purple slacks and white t-shirt. "Hey man," Hector called as he stood up from the curb. "Hey man, what's good?" Noah replied as he hugged his friend. "Just doing the thing before walking into the thing. You know how I get when I'm stuck in crowds that tight," Hector admitted. "Yes, I do, and that's why I walked over here. But I gotta run back. I'm with Fams. Talking with him, and did he tell you about his newest client?" "No, I haven't caught up with him. He's managing a new athlete then." "Skaters have mixed feelings about being called athletes, Hector." "Stoops," Hector kidded his friend with some impatience. "It's Cale Jacobs, dude," Noah said with a semi-drunken posture. "Wow, now that's a legendary boarder if there ever was one," Hector replied before sipping his car temperature can of beer. "One of the best to ever do it," Noah confirmed as Hector agreed. "Isn't he a little tripped out these days?" Hector asked. "Yeah, and he's only gotten more eccentric," Noah said before pausing to think. "Kinda makes sense, though. It can't be easy living with the responsibility of pushing skate culture forward and then having to wait around for everyone else to catch up." Hector looked at the event crowd as Noah went on. "Fams definitely has his work cut out for him. Just wait until you see Cale in there. He's speaking in his own version of medieval English." "Ah, man, that's awesome. One of my childhood heroes is going through his Arthurian phase." "Come find me after you meet him," Noah said while turning his steps back in the direction of the party. "We'll be inside looking at the art. I left Joe in there hanging solo with Fams and Cale. I gotta get back before she murders me for leaving her stranded." Hector put out the joint in a manner that would preserve the remaining unsmoked half for a later point in the evening. The beer was done and he felt ready to enter into the atmosphere and the crowd. Circles of conversation were scattered at first and became tighter as he got closer to the roll-up door and white walls housing the artwork. "Hey man, Hector, right?" A voice called out from a nearby circle as Hector neared the entrance to the roll-up door. Hector stopped and looked across the nearby crowd for the voice. He found a short party-goer whose eyes were looking in his direction, but obscured by the shadow from a hat's brim. "Hector, I used to see you at the skate park. I'm Greg, man. You probably don't remember because I was a little kid back then." Hector did remember but was feeling too overwhelmed by the crowd and the atmosphere, and he couldn't muster a clear thought to form a response, so he began to nod. "Don't go in there empty-handed. Take a beer for the trek. It's a hectic one tonight," Greg advised as he handed Hector a cold can. Hector liked being back in California. Inside, the event was filled with track light. The crowd was so loud that it nearly muted the jazz trio playing at the back of the space. Hector searched for Noah and Joe but couldn't spot them. He spent his time attempting to look at the art as best he could. It was an ironic task for any art opening, to spend time with the pieces that caught his eye, without feeling the pressure from oncoming attendees to move out of the way. It was all about taking the time to connect with the work, and after that it was about what occurred to him while looking at a given piece or collection. If he really liked something, he'd think about it again and again for weeks. This was a group show of mostly paintings, but what caused the space to feel more crowded were a set of wooden sculptures in the middle of the room. He made his way over to the roped-off structures and spotted Joe chatting with a girl that was so beautiful that it was almost upsetting. Joe was in her black slacks and collared blouse, with blown-out curls floating around her head and shoulders. The girl she spoke with wore an oversized t-shirt tucked into loose jeans, with long center-parted hair and thick eyebrows. The shirt was large and billowed down, stopping just above her elbows. Her wrists were small with a silver bracelet on the right, and a drugstore Casio watch on the left. She held an empty glass of wine in her right hand, while she gestured to Joe with her left hand rising and falling in the direction of the sculptures. Hector immediately looked down to assess his outfit and then turned around to make sure his hair wasn't doing anything too stupid. Then he looked for a pathway around the roped perimeter that would get him over to Joe and this girl in the most quick and efficient way possible. After spotting a route, he began to move through the crowd with more audacity than usual. He preferred to walk in a similar fashion to his cautious approach to driving, but this was a more urgent situation. He looked up to see if she was still talking to Joe, and she was. She was sweaty with identifiable moisture on her cheeks, and Hector had a momentary desire to smell her armpits from point-blank range. Back down in the crowd, he was looking for new paths with helpful currents to expedite his progress. The room was muggy with breath and body heat, but Hector wasn't worried about that, even as bulbs of sweat began to gather on his upper lip. He caught the smell of hot beer on his breath and made a commitment to himself to avoid surprising any other nostrils at the party with the flavors currently residing around his teeth and gums. Joe was there, but the girl was gone, and she smiled before greeting her frequent houseguest with a hug. She did this with no idea that Hector was in a moment of failure, having not moved through the crowd quickly enough. He began to wonder if the women of LA would continue to elude him for the rest of the summer. "Hey, bud," Joe smiled. "Hey, what's up?" Hector shouted back. Joe was a few years older than Noah. They'd met in Paris after Joe approached Noah in a gay bar to do some scout work on behalf of an interested colleague of hers, only to find out that Noah was in the process of approaching her. She was short, with long flowing curls and sharp, discerning eyes. Her father was a transplant from Trinidad living near Miami when he met her mother. They married before moving west, and she grew up near the water in Gardena. Hector explained his afternoon with Rob and Martin. He thought to mention his stop by the Beethoven statue, but felt superstitious and kept from bringing it up. Once he'd talked enough to feel his throat beginning to sting, he gave up on the possibility that Joe might organically mention the girl in the big shirt and jeans. "Hey, who was that girl you were just talking to?" Joe smiled a smile that was doing its best to restrain humor at Hector's obvious interest. "What girl?" She grinned wider now. "You're gonna do this to me? I can't stand when you do this to me." "I know," she agreed. "Noah really hates it too, but this is already too good, because you're sweaty and you look kinda desperate." Joe was like a big sister, and she could playfully tease like one. Hector tilted his head and dropped his chin while signaling with his eyes that he really needed to get to the facts. Joe rolled her eyes and relented. Okay, fine. This girl's cool, dude." "Okay, and what else?" "She's an artist, and she organized this whole show. This space is run by her and some friends." What a badass, he replied, surveying the show. Damn, really? Yeah, and she's from around here. I see her at the market all the time. So now we have a cool new friend. Frankie Cienlagos. Damn, Hector responded. Next he feared would be the confirmation that she had a boyfriend or girlfriend, or maybe she was even married. Hector had slept on Noah and Joe's spare room beds long enough for Joe to know exactly how to support her noticeably stressed friend. She's single, dude. Noah and Fams arrived just at that moment. Sang Pham was the third of Hector and Noah's childhood triumvirate. Phams was short, and his early 30s had given some additional weight to his once bony frame. His shaved head was hidden under a hat that matched sharply with an oversized jersey and military pants. He was second-generation Vietnamese from Orange County. Hector and Noah knew him as an Orange County skater that would pop up at LA spots on weekends. He had a camera, and they'd become fast friends after Phams asked to film Noah and Hector at Ramona Elementary School when they were all in their early teens. After that day, they began meeting up to skate every weekend. Phams eventually moved on from filming and was now becoming one of the most sought-after athlete agents in the skate industry. Hector, this is Kale, Phams announced over the music in the crowd. Kale, this is the old friend of mine that I was telling you about, Hector Alvarez. Cale Jacobs was dressed in casual attire from his shoulders down to the shoes on his feet, but above his eyes sat a gold kettle hat that reflected the bright lights from the warehouse. Greetings and good eve, esteemed lordship. The pleasure is all mine, Cale, and I understand you're working a bit with Phams now. That's awesome news. 'Tis a blessed opportunity for two lordships such as Pham and I to connect for the greater good, my lord. Well, I couldn't agree more, Hector replied as Cale Jacobs bowed in reverence. Now I must acquire the red fermented elixir from yonder. I bid thee farewell and good fortune, lordship Hector. The music stopped, and confused expressions from the crowd scanned the room for answers. With long hair and her big shirt, Frankie Cienlagos was perched near the top of a service ladder running up the back wall of the warehouse. Hello, everyone, she called out. The crowd responded with lively calls and shouts. My name is Frankie, for those of you who don't know me, and it's so good to see all of you tonight. It hit Hector immediately. His mind and body felt electrified and all his muscles locked and released in unison with the revelation. Frankie was without a doubt the voice from the shadows by the piano. The same voice and same laughter that trusted Hector's guiding shoulder and then disappeared. We like to organize these when we can, and we truly appreciate you coming out and supporting. And behaving yourselves well enough to keep the landlord happy, she announced before pausing. And that's it. The wine is free if you want some. Support the artists and their work, and make a purchase or two. Shit, even 3 if you're feeling good. The crowd began to cheer and whoop as Frankie flipped the warehouse lights on and off with a strobe effect. Okay, now if the ground starts to shake again tonight, love your neighbor and exit safely. Please don't trample each other. With a mixture of cynicism, humor, and some excitement, Hector moved in what he thought was Frankie's direction. It was difficult to know which direction to move inside the sea of shoulders, backs, and sweaty faces. But when he made it within earshot, her shouting voice further confirmed she was one and the same. Hector waited patiently for her to finish what sounded like a tiring conversation with an inquisitive woman regarding Frankie's artistic intentions. He enjoyed listening to Frankie strain to avoid any explanation or point of view about the sculptures she created. Because of all the noise, she was obligated to yell some half-baked explanations, which caused Hector to laugh to himself under his breath. The Q&A nature of the conversation would have been exhausting under any circumstances, but with the event's noise, it was unbearable. Having spent a few minutes enjoying himself, he decided to walk over and interrupt them. The paper cup of wine in his hand was nearly full, so he reached toward her, gesturing like an expected friend returning from the bar. He extended the cup slowly, doing his best to remain casual. Her eyes caught the cup in her peripheral vision. She looked up in the direction of the incoming beverage. From the cup, she then immediately looked to see who was behind it. She met Hector's eyes with unfiltered shock. Oh my land. Hey Frankie, Hector replied with a smile. He then turned to politely greet the woman he hoped would leave them alone. I'm sorry, she apologized to the woman. This is an old friend and we have to catch up. If you have any questions, please find me, okay? The woman thanked her and exited into the crowd. Hector reasserted the cup of wine in her direction, and she mouthed thank you with an exhausted face before taking a large sip. He exaggerated his mouth to say parking lot? while gesturing in the direction beyond the roll-up door. Outside they found an area less affected by the event noise. It seemed like a dream to be back with this woman in such an unexpected way. Hector felt more comfortable than he usually would, only because he was slightly annoyed. "How did you end up here, and how did you know it was me?" Frankie asked. "I have my ways," he replied. "Stop being so mysterious. Come on, I want to know," she said with some lingering shock in her posture. "I'll tell you, but you also owe me a few explanations too, don't you think?" She laughed softly and nodded while looking down to the pavement, and she was more shy now. Frankie looked back up to find Hector's eyes and his neglected haircut. "So how in the world did you find me?" "I have no idea," he laughed. "I got an invite from some friends." "Well, you did get that residency, so I know you're not completely crazy," she smiled. "So let's move to the next question. Wait, just a second now. Why did you ditch out on our deal last night?" "Jules wanted to leave, and she's a brat about those situations. I ducked out once you led me across the dance floor. I wanted to stay and hang out, but she drove." "Of course you did," Hector said with a playful motion in his shoulders. Hey, I really did. To be honest, though, I wasn't thrilled while we were out there in the trees. That was funny, but you don't know what it's like to be a woman in the dark with some guy asking about a drink. If we hadn't recognized you from the toast in front of the crowd, dude, we would have been gone." "I think I get that. But why would you follow me back to the party without your friend if you were so spooked?" "Jules was behind me the whole time, too, just a little further back. In case you had to spray me?" "That's correct." "Wow, so I was in more danger than I thought." "Yeah, try being a woman. You have no idea. But you still took a bit of a risk." "You really want me to say it, so I will. Fine. I also thought you were cute, and I wanted to hang out for a beverage. The way you were talking, I knew I could trust you about all the not turning around business. I could tell you were a trustable weirdo." She looked up and over the parking lot crowd towards the warehouse. "And now you owe me some more answers, don't you think, Hector? So I got a question." "I'll allow it." She rolled her eyes, and Hector could see they were dark brown. "So you coincidentally got an invite from an old friend to the show tonight, correct?" Hector nodded with one acknowledging dip of his chin. "How did you know it was me then? Did you cheat and look back last night? Maybe you peeked once we made it to the lawn, because I don't buy it if you're saying you just somehow guessed or something. Like, did Jules tell you?" "She's here too? We need to discuss her breach of contract as well." "Don't change the subject. Let's have it, bud." Hector was relaxed now. A fresh can of beer in his hand reactivated the joint from earlier. He hadn't had any water since leaving the house, and he could feel his stomach turn with the alchemy of queso blanco and hot sauce. It crossed his mind to lie, but he reconsidered. Even a playful lie with playful intent could jeopardize whatever he hoped might happen here. "Well, against my better judgment, I'm going to continue with my honesty streak. It was your voice. I knew it from last night. Then, next thing I know, you're up on some ladder raising a toast to the crowd with a paper cup. It's an art show." I know. Having to yell about aesthetics and observations until my voice is hoarse. It just makes me tight. You're a bit on the high maintenance side, aren't you, Hector? I should probably warn you, I do have a laundry list of needs that need to be met for just about every life situation. "I see," Frankie responded with an expecting smirk. "Maybe an example could help, just so that I know what I'm dealing with." "Okay, sure thing," he said before pausing to take the moment needed to set up a meaningful hypothetical. "So how about this? I'm about to ask if we can leave this show and drive somewhere to grab a drink and make good on our agreement." She grinned and waited for the oncoming details. "If I'm lucky enough for the first part of this plan to work, I'll then need us to accurately estimate the amount of time it will take to say our respective goodbyes to friends, so that they know we're leaving. That process can spiral into another hour if not handled expeditiously, which is an important factor to avoid for me," he grinned. "I have this thing about time that's like a disease." "You're one of those folks. Good to know." "Sadly, yes." "How bad we talking?" "Not too bad, but it's there." Okay. I like punctuality enough," she said, looking down into her bag. "Can we skip the goodbyes and just head somewhere now?" "We can absolutely do that. Do you need to grab anything?" "I have my purse and my phone. I'm good." "Where would you like to go? Does Chinatown work for you?" "That works very well, actually," she answered, satisfied before going on. "Did you make any wishes during the earthquake?" "I didn't know that was a thing. Is that a thing?" "We can talk about it on the way to Chinatown."